This family was happily taking a family photo, but behind the photographer sat an adopted black teen. Against her husband's objections, the mom insisted he join them. Michael was caught off guard and had to stand awkwardly behind Leigh Ann Tuohy. The moment the photographer pressed the shutter, this burly black boy felt the warmth of a family for the very first time. At just 16, Michael stood nearly 6 feet 7 inches tall and weighed a whopping 344 pounds. One of his feet was even bigger than a girl's head. He'd been introverted since childhood, all because his mom was a drug addict. Never having met his dad, he'd been bouncing around his whole life. For years, he was like a football, passed from one foster home to another, more than a dozen total. That night, he heard his foster parents arguing loudly again, complaining he ate too much and telling him to get out. In reality, those foster parents only took him in to scam government checks. Michael was no stranger to homelessness. He'd scavenge leftover popcorn when hungry and crash in the school gym when tired. It wasn't until Leigh Ann came into his life that his fate changed forever.
What is he wearing? It's freezing.
John rolled down the car window and asked where he was going. Shivering uncontrollably from the cold, Michael mumbled he was heading to the gym. But Leigh Ann saw him walking in the opposite direction and couldn't bear to leave him. The plastic bag he carried held all his belongings. She chased after him and asked why he was lying. The gym was already closed.
Why were you going to the gym?
Because it's warm.
Michael looked like a kid who'd been caught misbehaving. Leigh Ann saw right through his humble stubbornness. She glanced back at her husband and son, and she knew what she had to do. With the guest room cluttered with junk, Leigh Ann told Michael he could crash on the couch for the night. She assured him he could come upstairs if he needed anything. But once back in her room, doubts crept in. He was a black kid from the projects. Could something go wrong? The next morning, she nervously walked downstairs only to find Michael had left early and neatly folded the couch and bedding. The sight left her stunned. Ashamed of her doubts, she rushed out to ask him to stay one more day. Leigh Ann cooked a feast for dinner. Collins, the older sister, offered Michael a plate without hesitation. Afraid of being judged for eating too much, he only served himself a little fried rice and vegetables, then quietly grabbed a small piece of bread. While everyone else lounged on the couch eating and watching the game, Leigh Ann noticed Michael was the only one sitting at the dining table, eating his Thanksgiving lunch solemnly. She turned off the TV and told everyone to gather around the table for grace. Collins held out her hand without hesitation, and SJ, the younger brother, quickly gestured for Michael to join. He froze. It was the first time anyone had reached out to hold his hand voluntarily. Leigh Ann smiled, satisfied. Michael had made this Thanksgiving meaningful. She looked him up and down, feeling like something was missing. She offered to take him shopping for new clothes, but the insecure Michael hesitated, saying he already had clothes. They drove to the black neighborhood where Michael used to live. That's when he noticed several thugs staring at Leigh Ann.
Don't get out the car.
Leigh Ann glanced outside the car. The thugs were winking at her and making vulgar jokes about Michael. He ignored them and walked straight toward his mom's old house. But when he got close, he saw it had been repossessed by the court. Heartbroken, he sat down on the corner, his eyes gradually turning red. He knew he'd been abandoned again. Unable to get Michael's old clothes back, Leigh Ann insisted on buying him new ones. Never having set foot in a black neighborhood before, she clutched her purse tightly the entire time.
You're gonna take care of me, right?
I got your back.
They browsed the store, but Leigh Ann wasn't satisfied. There were barely any clothes that fit Michael's frame. She picked out a few pieces, but he said he didn't like any of them. In the end, he grabbed the cheapest shirt on the rack.
Well, all right then.
That night, she couldn't help but ask Michael if he'd ever thought about staying long-term.
I don't want to go anyplace else.
The next day, Leigh Ann cleared out a room for Michael. Unable to find a bed frame long enough for him, she had one custom made. Staring at the room, Michael was completely dumbfounded.
Never had one before.
What, a room to yourself?
A bed.
Leigh Ann couldn't fathom how a boy could be passed around by so many foster families for over a decade, never even having a bed to call his own. But little did he know, someone had been quietly caring about him all along. Michael's female teacher at school noticed he was different from the first class. Even though he didn't write a single word on his test, he drew a small boat on the back, and the person in the boat was himself. It symbolized his overwhelming pain and loneliness as a black student in a mostly white school. While other teachers complained that Michael was intellectually challenged, Miss Sue stepped up. She pulled out an essay Michael had thrown in the trash and read it aloud.
I look and I see white everywhere. White walls, white floors, and a lot of white people.
The teachers don't know I can't understand anything. I go to the bathroom, look in the mirror, and say, "This isn't Michael O'Her."
How's the spelling?
Prejudice is an invisible wall, and love and understanding are the morning light that pierces through it. Miss Sue was Michael's morning light. She'd ask him to stay after school for one-on-one tutoring, patient and kind. Michael gradually opened up to her, and his grades slowly improved. Inspired by her, other teachers joined in. They let go of their prejudices and regained faith in Michael. During his time living with the Tuohis, Michael made tremendous academic progress and earned a tryout for the school football team. But as a total beginner, he couldn't even wrap his head around the rules, let alone understand the coach's instructions. Determined to get Michael on the field, SJ took it upon himself to train him personally. Michael initially thought SJ was just messing around, but his little brother said seriously,
"Everybody at Wingate is expecting you to be a star football player. You don't want to let them down, do you?"
SJ was tough on Michael, but he never thought about giving up, and their bond grew even stronger. As Michael grew closer to the Tuohi family, rumors started reaching Lee Ann's ears. At a party, friends made reckless jokes about Michael, calling him King Kong and teasing that he could eat her husband's restaurant out of business. Lee Ann brushed it off with a smile, but the arrogant socialites upped the ante. "We know you're being kind, but have you thought about your daughter?"
He's a boy, a large black boy, sleeping under the same roof.
Lee Ann had indeed changed Michael's life, and she realized she hadn't considered her daughter's feelings. So she asked Collins sincerely if she felt uncomfortable living with Michael. But her daughter was far more mature than she imagined.
"They're stupid kids. Who cares what they say?"
Collins's answer strengthened Lee Ann's resolve. That night, Michael approached Lee Ann and said he wanted a driver's license. Lee Ann looked confused. "You don't even have a car. Why do you need a license?" Michael replied that he just wanted an ID to prove who he was. They went to the local office to check, but found no record of Michael's name in the system, so she went home to discuss it with Sean, and they decided to legally adopt Michael as part of their family. However, while processing the paperwork, Lee Ann learned the full extent of Michael's tragic childhood through the agency's records. He had never met his father. All he knew was what the principal told him. His dad had jumped off a bridge and killed himself late at night. His mom was a drug addict who had given birth to over a dozen children. With no source of income, Michael had been forcibly taken away from his mom when he was little. The Tuohi family formally asked Michael if he wanted to become one of them. Michael glanced at Collins instinctively, then at SJ beside him and said softly,
Kinda thought I already was.
Well, all right then.
From then on, Michael had his first piece of official ID in his life. After he got his driver's license, Sean gave him a pickup truck as a gift. Michael was thrilled to take SJ out for a drive, but they got into an accident at an intersection. When Lee Ann arrived, she saw the front of the truck was crushed, and Michael was overwhelmed with guilt. Fortunately, SJ only suffered minor injuries. The paramedics told Lee Ann it was a miracle. Given the severity of the crash when the airbags deployed, the passenger would have surely been killed or permanently disabled. Someone must have been watching over him. God's hand shielded him in that dangerous moment, they said. Lee Ann was grateful for God's protection until she saw Michael's injured right arm. Then it hit her. There was no God. It was Michael who had used his own body to shield SJ from harm. Yet this was also Michael's weakness. Despite his strong protective instincts, he never wanted to hurt anyone. If he wanted to make it in football, he had to overcome this flaw. But during practice, he still struggled to understand the coach's words. That's when Lee Ann walked over and asked him, if someone was going to hurt your family, would you stop them? After Michael nodded firmly, Lee Ann told him, treat all your teammates like they're me, SJ, and Collins. Sure enough, with Lee Ann's guidance, Michael quickly figured it out and became a key player on the team. Soon he got his chance to play in a real game. Michael had plenty of raw strength, but he was outmaneuvered by the opponents right from the start, unable to defend against their attacks. As the score gap widened, the coach grew anxious on the sidelines, and Michael looked like a kid who'd done something wrong. In the final play of the first half, Michael was tackled to the ground, and an opponent deliberately kicked him hard in the head. The coach protested, but the referee ignored him. Finally, he snapped.
This young man plays for my team. My team, or any other redneck son of a bitch.
Don't worry, Coach. I got your back.
When the second half started, Michael was a different person. He remembered the tactics he'd practiced with his teammates, and their roaring voices echoed in his ears. As the game resumed, Michael was like a fierce beast, unstoppable. Having found his breakthrough, Michael led the team to score repeatedly, gradually reversing the score and miraculously leading them to victory. SJ also deserved credit. He'd specially recorded Michael's games, burned them onto CDs, and sent them to major colleges across the country. When coaches from universities nationwide watched the videos, they were all amazed. This was a once-in-a-lifetime talent. The next day, coaches from top colleges traveled hundreds of miles to the practice fields, all eager to see Michael's skills in person. They pulled out their phones one after another, calling their school administrators to urge them to recruit him immediately, stating that they'd offer him a full scholarship as long as his grades met the requirements. To help Michael get into the best possible school, Lee Ann grew anxious. His current grades were far from enough for admission, so she hired a private tutor at a high cost. With the tutor's patient guidance, Michael's grades in all subjects gradually improved. But after graduating smoothly, he faced a new dilemma. College coaches were visiting his home every day, offering generous deals to get him to choose their school. Although Michael already had an idea, Leigh Ann hoped he'd go to the University of Mississippi. It was friendlier to him, and it was also her and Sean's alma mater. The decision carried a hint of selfishness. She wanted Michael to bring glory to her hometown school. So, following his family's advice, Michael ultimately applied to Ole Miss. However, an unexpected turn of events happened soon after. Investigators from the NCAA suddenly contacted Leigh Ann and Michael. They suspected that Leigh Ann had adopted Michael solely to get him to play for her alma mater, alleging that it was a form of benefit transfer to a special interest group. They accused Leigh Ann sharply. Her adoption was not out of charity, but self-interest. As the investigators pressed him relentlessly, Michael's faith wavered. He confronted Leigh Ann. "Why did you lie to me? Was all this care for me genuine, or did you have an ulterior motive?" Angry and hurt, Michael ran away from home. Leigh Ann also began to doubt her own motives. Had she interfered too much in his life? She thought back and realized she'd never truly understood Michael's innermost thoughts. Over the years, she'd made all the big and small decisions for him. Meanwhile, Michael returned to the projects, hoping his mom had come back, but instead he was met by the same thugs from before. They took him to a drug den pretending to care about him. Actually, they wanted Michael to work for them. The thugs thought they had Michael under their thumb. They cursed loudly and made vulgar jokes about Collins. "Shut up," Michael told them, but the man pulled a gun from his waistband. Michael got into a fight with them, but after knocking down several of the thugs, he suddenly froze. Memories of being separated from his mom as a child came flooding back. On the other side, Leigh Ann couldn't stop worrying about Michael. After searching all night, she finally received his call. She saw right through his troubled mind and apologized before he could say anything. "Do you even want to play football?" she asked.
I'm pretty good at it.
Yeah, you are.
Then she suggested, "If it's just for the scholarship, you should go to the University of Tennessee."
So you want me to go to Tennessee?
I want you to do whatever you want.
It's your life.
"What if I wanted to work in a small restaurant instead?" Michael asked. Leigh Ann smiled. "Then that's your life too." Michael's heart was finally at peace. He contacted the investigators again. When asked why he wanted to go to Ole Miss, Michael said sincerely,
Because it's where my family goes to school. It's where they've always gone to school.
and that's how the movie ends. However, this is a true story. In real life, Michael O'Hare got into the University of Mississippi through his athletic talents, became an NFL player, and earned a multi-million-dollar annual salary. His desperate longing for a family turned into an unbreakable wall protecting his teammates on the field. His seemingly awkward silence hid the purest perception of kindness. It turns out there are no real weaknesses in this world, only unseen talents and untapped strength. This film is The Blind Side, which topped the North American box office for 2 consecutive weeks. If you enjoyed today's commentary, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you next time.